The Sound Off Podcast. The podcast about broadcast with Matt Kundle. Starts now.
Sometimes you read articles about radio and it's almost like the author is reading your mind. You find yourself nodding along with the words. That's what's happened to me the last few months when I read Charese Frugé's columns on allaccess.com. Most of what she writes is common sense, but it's the type of common sense that's not in the budget. Or the type of common sense that corporate has no interest in this quarter. She's had 20 plus years in the radio business and a LinkedIn page that spans LA, San Francisco, Houston, Denver, and Las Vegas. She owns her own radio and talent consulting business and is also a voice actor, voiceover talent, and you know what? She's for hire. Charese Frugé joins me from her home in Las Vegas.
Why did you want to get into mass communications for a degree?
Well, both my parents are teachers. It wasn't my goal to pursue a mass communications degree. It was my goal to get my parents off my back and go to college. But I always knew as a child even that I was going to be in television broadcasting or radio broadcasting or something along those lines. So it's what you do with where I'm from and the kind of family I was raised in. You go to college. And truth be told, I randomly did a high school radio show, which was really fun in a very small town, population 1,700 people. But I didn't know at that point it was going to be my career. When I went to college in Lafayette, Louisiana, there was a poster on the board or whatever that said, we're looking for interns for, it was the very popular KSMB 94.5, CHR radio station, which covers a big area because it's such a small area. So, this was the one big radio station for all the cities across the Southwest. So I was a freshman probably and was not at the age or level to be able to actually get credit for it. So I did what most radio geeks do, which is I'll just go work for free. So I knew that I would be in some form of broadcasting, but I didn't specifically go to college for that. I went to college because that's what we do. And mass communication seemed like the best fit because I just kind of happened to stumble into radio very early on in my college curriculum.
Tell me about the stumbling part. So you didn't set out to go into radio. You kind of mentioned that it would be TV broadcasting maybe. So what was radio and TV like in your house?
Well, we had a small radio station called KEU in Eunice, Louisiana, which is the city that I'm from, population 1,700. And one of my neighbors, Carl Derwin, may he rest in peace, was the owner and the boss. So I was always very interested and we were always hanging out at their house or what have you. And then I had this great sort of mentor who was also a part of our community and always around and doing everything. His name was Tom Vanchet and he started at, I believe, KEUN and KJJB. I'm probably getting these wrong, but they're very small stations. So he started out and he was just such a funny man. And, everybody knew him and loved him. And then he became a big television personality. I still think he's on the ABC affiliate in Lafayette now. That's how it happened. I just kind of stumbled into radio because there was the poster on the board and I was very ambitious. I mean, I was 50 times more mature and proactive and intelligent when I was 18, 19, 20 than I have ever been in my life. I think when I turned 35, I started to try to catch up on the things I missed, because I literally started college in high school and then went straight to career in my first year of college. And by the time I was graduating college, I was going to both LSU and USL to finish my degree. And I had 2 full-time jobs, one at the radio station and one at the television station.
That is incredibly Gen X of you.
And working for free, by the way.
Yeah, so I was the same way. Like I was right out of the gate. I was still in university, but then I was also doing radio at the college and as well community radio, or not even community, it was commercial radio locally. I did that in the Annapolis Valley, which is really the heart of Acadian country. And you did it, I guess, at the other end, down in Cajun country. You're right in Cajun country.
And we do call it the heart of Acadiana, and we obviously probably took that from you guys, but it's such an amazing culture, but I'm sure that the influence is, more Cajun than where you were raised, but we liken it very much to your culture.
Well, I was just listening back to the way you pronounce Derwin.
Yeah. And actually I say Frugé, because in radio it's fancy. And like one of my first bigger jobs was New Orleans and then Vegas. So Frugé was fancy and sounded very stripper. So it fit Las Vegas. But we say Frugé back home. The accent, is on the U versus the A. And the Cajun French is obviously a slang version of French too, so that's what I kind of grew up with, was the Cajun version of French, which I to this day struggle with. And now I'm trying to learn Italian, which makes it even worse because they're all very similar, but there are different accents everywhere and pronunciations and what have you.
I'm telling you, your first trip to Canada has to be to Montreal. Actually, I might be wrong. Your first trip to Canada might be to Nova Scotia.
Yeah, that too. Yes. Well, because obviously that's where they say our direct descendants are from, and we were exiled there because of our Catholic religion. So, yes, this was all part of my history and learning, and growing up and going to Catholic school was learning about our Canadian history and our Acadiana culture and coming from Nova Scotia.
When did you first find your way onto the radio?
Like I said, I stumbled into it on a high school radio show where they just sort of reached out to our high school and said they wanted a couple of kids to get together and do like a gossipy type show. So it really was. And it's a very small town. And I went to a very small high school. I graduated with 27 people in my class, but it was the Catholic school. The public school couldn't have been more than 500 either. Back to your question.
What was the first commercial radio station?
Oh, first commercial. Well, actually, it was a commercial radio station, believe it or not. But I guess the first real radio station was 94.5 KSMB in Lafayette, which was when I went to college. And I saw this poster for the internship on the board. And I was just, okay, great. Like, that sounds like fun. Let's go do it. I just needed stuff to do. So I went and applied, and it was an internship, but I wasn't ready. I wasn't at the level to be able to accept credits for the course. So I just said, well, I'll just do it. And I had so much like public speaking training and what have you, because I competed in debate and, the dramatic readings that you do in high school and you compete. I did all that. I had a lot of experience and obviously the ability to communicate with a decent accent that didn't have as many inflections as the Bayou language has down there. When they just sound, it's horrible. I didn't have any of that because both my parents are educators. My mom did speech therapy, et cetera, so I got lucky and they didn't say, no way, what have you. They just said, sure, if you want to, well, of course, radio. They were like, you want to work for free? Okay, great. And back then it was legal.
So when did you start getting paid?
Probably about 6 months into it. I literally started by answering phones for Dave Hubble on the Underground Lounge on Sunday nights. And he was determined, and I didn't know this, to train me to be on the air. And one night he was like, okay, so I gotta go. You ready? And I'm like, what are you talking about? And he's like, yeah, when the song's over, hit the button, pop on the mic. And I was like, what? Wait. And he's like, gotta go. Bye. And I'm like, shit. 94.5 KSMB. I mean, he just threw me on the air. And so about 6 months in, I had sort of like a dual role. And then they had a promotions assistant opening. So I said, look, guys, I've been doing this for 6 months for free. Can a sister at least get a break and get these part-time hours? And that's how it started. So I was answering phones. I was doing overnight shifts, which is when I learned to start drinking coffee. And then I was working part-time in promotions.
Do you take your coffee black?
I did back then, but not today.
Do you remember why you took your coffee black back then?
I'll be honest and say, because I don't think I knew any better, honestly. My mom and dad didn't put a lot of cream in their coffee and what have they didn't have the luxuries that I drink Starbucks coffee and it's iced coffee now. So
I always thought it was because there was no cream and sugar left over. The daytime people all used it up.
Oh yeah, no, they had that nasty powder cream. Maybe I just didn't like it.
Was promotions your path throughout your 20s?
No, I knew once I popped that mic that promotions was my side gig. But I got to do a lot of fun stuff because we were a very active CHR radio station and we were in the middle of everything. So it was my side hustle. But my goal at that point, honestly, was to be on the air. And then eventually my goal was to be in morning drive. And I was very passionate about that for a long time until I got kicked in the teeth a couple times. And I was like, this is not cool. It was hard for a woman, especially in the South, to have any kind of role except Gigglebox. And I think people who know me know that I'm not going to keep my mouth shut.
So you're on a variety of CHR stations. So give me your best on-air experience gig, and then give me the one that was the worst.
On-air experience, the best was when I worked at B97 in New Orleans. B97 was the station, my dream job. Oddly, I said I didn't know that radio was my thing, but in the back of my mind, B97 was always the big station. New Orleans is everything they say it is. And back then, it was your job to get on the air and have fun. They were bringing in New Orleans original daiquiris all the time. They were bringing in the most delicious food all the time. Mardi Gras, Jazz Fest, Voodoo, French Quarter Fest, you name it. Every day there was something amazing about that job. And I made some of the best friends that I have ever made and some of the longest relationships that I will ever have. And I could go 2-3 years without speaking to any of them and pick up the phone and it feels like we spoke yesterday. And New Orleans was the big city for Louisiana. It's 2 hours south of where I'm from. My soul still lives there. If I could, I'd go back for Mardi Gras every year. I actually used to make it a point to go back to Jazz Fest once a year. But obviously travel's gotten so crazy. These festivals have gotten so crazy. New Orleans is kind of a COVID hub every once in a while. So it's just been really obviously difficult to do that for a long time. And worst. Oh, let's see. Baton Rouge, probably. I went from Lafayette to Beaumont to do mornings with Mark Landis, which was fun, but didn't last very long because I think we went from like CHR to alternative to all kinds of things. But I was miserable in Beaumont, so I wanted to come back to Louisiana. I got hired to do mornings in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and then they hired someone to work with me. I was told so many things, and then I was the lead in the show, and then they hired a guy, and then they made the guy the lead, and it was like they were pitting each other. It was horrible. It was hard. It was difficult. It wasn't the right situation for me, but it was a stepping stone because B97 was right down the street from Baton Rouge. At the time, the station, by the way, was called Loose 102. This is what I believe is still WFMF. So the station was Loose 102 in Baton Rouge. Randy Lane was consulting B97 in New Orleans. New Orleans was right down the street. So in the midst of all of the drama in Baton Rouge, it kind of put me on the radar there. And I ended up getting the call from Randy Lane to see if I would be interested in working at B97 in New Orleans. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Can you meet me there? And, I could be there in like an hour and a half. The Baton Rouge situation was one of the tough ones on air.
For the younger part of our listeners, can you explain the difficulties of being a woman on the radio in the 90s?
There were none. And if they were midday girls. And if they were on the morning show, their name was not on the show. They made a fourth of what the host made. They got no airtime, and their job was to laugh at the guy's jokes. They had no opportunity for management. No one would take the time to either manage them or help them grow and learn things to expand their career. And no one had any interest in putting women on the air because it just wasn't a thing. And it was hard for me because there were no role models at the time, with the exception of maybe Kelly Raspberry, who, Craddock was so good to her. And Craddock was actually really good to me also. He was always on my resume as a recommendation. He was always there when I called and I needed some help. He always said, surround yourself with good people and you will always be successful. And I learned so very much from him. So Kelly was, probably one of the few women on the radio that I could at least look to. I didn't know her. I knew Kid. But there were no other women in the business in any form of management or any form of a lead role on the air or what have you. You were just a midday girl or a giggle box for the morning show. And if you were a market manager as a female, which I only know of one back then, sadly, she was not the kind of woman who wanted to promote other women because she had to fight so hard to get to where she was. And sadly, a lot of those still exist. But for the most part now in radio, especially with me being exposed to women in radio, Alliance for Women in Media, mentoring and inspiring women, and doing my Women to Watch, most women want other women in this business to succeed because we just need more of them. But there are some who still won't help one another because they're afraid to lose what they feel like they've fought so hard to achieve.
Was there ever a moment when you thought, this is too much, I'm just going to quit and do something else?
Oh my gosh. Yes. So many times. And I think that's normal and it comes with the territory, but I'm not going to lie to you. I have been kicked in the teeth a lot in this business. but I have also been very blessed. So I've had an amazing career. Working in New Orleans was amazing. Working in Los Angeles was amazing until it wasn't. And that was at the time that Clear Channel was becoming iHeart. So that was a tough situation because that was like my second dream job. B97 first, anywhere in LA second. I will tell you this, I have been very blessed, but the two most difficult and almost obscene circumstances for me were in Houston and in Indianapolis. They were extremely challenging jobs mentally and professionally. And they were both situations where you're told one thing and your job is supposed to be one thing and it's not. And it was very, very tough. So on more than one occasion, I've been through situations where, when I was in New Orleans, actually, I was hired to do mornings. And during morning show boot camp, changeover management, lots of stuff happening. B97 going from a weird hot AC, which it never really was, to back to a mainstream CHR. I had been hired to do mornings by myself, and then they hired a producer. He was a producer from Detroit, and one day he did not like me at all. He did not like the fact that I was the host. My grandmother passed away, and I went home to the funeral, and on that day, they had the afternoon guy sit in with the producer, and the producer had this voice guy who did Jack Nicholson, who faked Jack Nicholson very well. So while I was gone on that day, he came in, they did a show, and they did the call to Jack Nicholson, and Jack Nicholson got on the air, and oh my God, it was the greatest thing ever, and I came home, and morning show boot camp started that weekend in New Orleans, and they told me right before going to morning show boot camp that I was being moved to middays and off mornings, and I was devastated. And I ran into Kid Craddock and his crew in the elevator crying. Actually, they told me at the hotel at morning show boot camp. So I was leaving in tears, and I was in the elevator, and I got in the elevator with Craddock and his crew. And they were all like, "Oh my God, what's wrong? Are you okay?" And I'm like, that whole story. And that's how my relationship with Craddock started. That was probably a time where I was like, this business is too hard. It's too much. And I am the kind of person, my parents were so driven. My mom was going to school to get her college degree when I was growing up because I was the fifth kid. So I was so driven that my job meant everything to me. That was my boyfriend. It was my life. It was my purpose. It was my passion. So I took a lot of things really, really hard. And some of those, my mom and I would often have conversations about, is this going to really satisfy you for the rest of your life? You're a woman in a man's world who has an opinion and is so passionate and, refuses to follow the rules or play the politics. Is this going to make you and there were often times when I questioned, is this the right thing for me? And there's a song, Turn the Car Around, Onair, I believe it is. When that song came out, I was like, oh my God, this is how I feel about radio. How many times can I break till I'm shattered? And every time I turn the car around and I go back and I do it again, So yeah, there's been some times.
But as you pointed out earlier, there were no women in high up positions. And this is sort of a point where you say, I'm going to be a program director.
I fell into that too, because I thought morning drive was going to be my life. I thought I was doing mornings and that was my whole thing. And then obviously I feel like I got kicked in the teeth in New Orleans. So I started to get a feel for middays. And so fast forward to like a year and a half later, the two guys that got the morning show and moved me to middays, they turned around and screwed over the program director, violated a contract, and went across the street to do mornings. Karma Comeback was the name of the column I wrote, because the day after they did that, the program director who moved me to middays calls me in and says, I need you to go do mornings again. And I was like, are you kidding me? I am not getting up and going to work at 6 o'clock in the morning, blah, blah, blah. So I don't know how I thought this was better for me because I was doing 10 to 3, but I said, I'll tell you what I will do. I'll come in and I'll do 8 to 3. I'll come in at 8 and I'll help you out. I don't know why I put more hours on me to do it, but I did it because I thought I was doing him a favor. I don't know. I just was like, first of all, I'm not getting up that early ever again. And secondly, I'll come in and do 8 to 3, putting more pressure on myself instead. being in New Orleans and working there, and Vegas is almost the same way, but the cultures are very different. You know what I mean? But Vegas, you can do the same thing. I mean, the first time I moved here and worked here in Las Vegas for the first 6 months, I raged like a rock star, and just about every weekend walked out of the casino and the sun was so bright. And I had a 10 o'clock air shift. So Vegas and New Orleans in terms of lifestyle can be very much the same, but the culture's different.
I had that down as a question, was to ask you if you survived working in Vegas, but I'm glad you covered it off without me asking.
I did. The first 6 months, I raged like a rock star. And I collectively have lived here in radio, hands-on, for 10 years. So, yeah. But there was a point in time where I'd be like, I've seen Adele. Go, have fun, you know? Rolling Stone, can't do it. You're like, you know, you get really spoiled. When you live in a city like Las Vegas, you can be very spoiled.
In just a second, Charese and I get deep into radio's issues. It's not quite a therapy session, but you could very well be lying on a couch and she could be charging you $2.50 an hour for the advice she's about to dispense. What more can be done for women in radio? What can we do about all those emails we're getting? We're also going to talk about her ascension at CBS Radio and when it ended when CBS was taken over by Entercom. Hang on. Good times ahead. And links to all of her writings can be found at soundoffpodcast.com.
The Sound Off Podcast.
Tell me about the Los Angeles experience.
I was hired to program Star 98.7, the Hot AC, after Mike Marino, I believe. And it was very heavy 80s when I came in, but they wanted to move it back to a Hot AC. And, you know, for CBS, I had a history of fixing Hot ACs. And at the time, I had been in Denver at Alice for probably not even a year. And I fixed Alice like right away because that's what I do. I just, you know.
Just remind everybody a little bit about what Alice was. I know it because that was my era, but it was quite a special station.
Yeah, it still is, actually. And the program director, BJ, was also the morning guy, and it was just too much and too overwhelming for him. And Alice really needed some help. The station needed a facelift. I was hired from CBS, finally, after sticking myself into a 5-year deal. I finally got to go somewhere else, and that was Denver. And I made a deal with one of the VPs because LA had called me on more than one occasion, but there were so many times where it was just an 80s station. So I made an off-the-record deal with one of the VPs to go to Denver, and if LA called, they would let me go. So about a year into my Denver job, I got the call, and it was the right time because they were taking 98.7 in Los Angeles from a very heavy 80s station back to a Hot AC. So I made the phone call and said, I got to go. And we had a verbal, and so it was good. They let me go. And I got there, and it was my dream job. It was my dream job. And I took that station, and while I was in Vegas, I built the brand Mix 94.1 as a almost modern adult leaning Hot AC. You know, it was pop alt for the most part. Vegas was very much a rock market. Also, our sister station was Extreme Radio, which was supposed to be alternative, but very hardcore active rock. And then LA is, you know, Vegas is a suburb of LA. So K-Rock was always one of my favorite stations. I programmed the Hot AC in Vegas very much like K-Rock. I helped cross over The Killers, Imagine Dragons, Panic at the Disco. All these guys were from Vegas, right? And the rock station in our cluster wouldn't play them. And the rock station across the street wouldn't play them. So I played them. So we got the credit for crossing them over to pop. And so I took that formula of pop alt in Los Angeles and did the same thing with 98.7. And it was right before PPM, maybe 2 years before PPM. It was the first time in years that 98.7 had a cum of 2 million or more. Now, keep in mind, 2 million is not a lot for Los Angeles, but it was diary back then, not the more realistic calculation in terms of cum only. That, you know, now it's what? Probably 8 million. I'm totally guessing. I haven't seen it in a long time. But anyway, my point is we were very successful with 98.7 with that formula. And it was the first time in years that station had cummed over 2 million, which was a really good thing. So we were on our way. But again, at the time, Clear Channel was becoming iHeart. And iHeart had a boner for K-Rock. And that's okay. And I was devastated because Hot AC was my baby at the time. But in hindsight, it was such a good move because I had that pop alt background. We flipped 98.7 to what is alt 98.7 now. And fast forward to today, and K-Rock is on the third page of ratings in Los Angeles, and alt 98.7 is at the top. So in hindsight, it was a good move to flip it to alternative, although it broke my heart because I was John Mayer, Goo Goo Dolls, Imagine Dragons, the singer-songwriters and the pop alternatives and the what have you, just not quite as hardcore. There was some Kelly Clarkson in between. But working in Los Angeles was also very amazing because I made some very good personal and professional friends. I developed a fantastic relationship with Kiefer Sutherland and hung out with he and Jude Cole so often at one of the restaurants in Hollywood. Had so much fun with those guys. They had Ironworks Music, which was not only a studio, but a record label. That was, their hobby. And then, of course, all of my favorite band members and musicians lived there. Living in Los Angeles is really fun in that sense. But I was also off the radar enough to have a normal life, and I didn't have to live that life if I didn't want to. It's like Vegas. If you go do all that stuff, then you go. But you can go home to your own place and still be sort of normal if you're not that person that's caught up in the pretentiousness of it all. So LA was a great experience for me. Sadly, it didn't last long because of the changeover in the companies, but I was fortunate because at the time CBS wanted me to come back and Kevin Weatherly wanted me out of Los Angeles. And so Kevin and Greg Strassel made a full court press to get me into San Diego and San Francisco for CBS Radio. And I got lucky. I didn't want to leave LA, but San Diego and San Francisco didn't suck.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned Jude Cole, by the way, because I did notice that you did that contest that involved Jude. Thank you, by the way, for the Kiefer Sutherland Canadian mention. That may be the only Canadian that gets mentioned on this episode.
No, that was a blast, actually. Like I said, these guys were really creative and they were having so much fun. And they had this amazing artist called Rocco DeLuca. And then obviously Lifehouse. Jude is Lifehouse's manager. They did all their work in the studio. It was one of my favorite albums that they did. I got to hear it first, yada, yada, yada. But we decided to give away a record contract. So we did this online contest where we had submissions from Southern California. There were over 600 submissions for these bands who had the opportunity to win a $25,000 record deal, and Jude would produce a record, and then you would get to use the Ironworks Music Studio, which was state of the art because Kiefer's got some dollars in his pocket, and he's also, obviously very into music and was a musician, guitar player. He had all these vintage guitars. It was just really cool. And so going to some of those contests and watching these bands compete and being involved in something like that, it was huge for our radio station and very big for web traffic as well, obviously, because you had to vote. You had to vote online, and then you had to go and watch the performances and then come back and pick the best band. It was really cool.
Well, I didn't know that Jude Cole did the Lifehouse song, but I do remember playing Jude Cole's record back in the early 90s.
Yes, I believe he was Warner. I'm not sure. But he still, to this day, manages Lifehouse and has produced a lot of their records.
So Greg Strassel, who's now, I believe, at Hubbard?
Yes, he is VP or EVP of Hubbard. They have so many titles.
Did you get San Francisco or San Diego or both?
I got San Diego with the intention that I think they knew that they were going to make a PD change in San Francisco. So I actually moved to San Diego to fix what they called Sophie at 103.7. And that was a boutique-y AAA hot AC hybrid. And I needed to fix it and bring it back to a hot AC with that pop alt bass, right? So I went there and I did that. And in the meantime, they hired me to move to San Francisco for a minute and to fix Alice. So I moved to San Francisco in about a 6-month period. We reunited Sarah and Vinny and put the station back on the right track. And then there were so many chess moves involved and so much responsibility. At one point, I was programming day-to-day Sophie in San Diego, Alice in San Francisco, and The Zone in Sacramento. And then Justin Chase went to Beasley, and I picked up KMXB again in Las Vegas. This would have been the second time I picked up KMXB in Vegas. So there was too much going on, and I was becoming unhealthy. My market managers were getting frustrated because I couldn't be in all of the markets at one time. So they all got together and said, we've got to do something about this. And I was starting to think, I've got to fix this. So they really kind of gave me an option of what I wanted to do. And I chose to move back to San Diego and program San Diego and Las Vegas and those two only. Because at the time, Michael Martin had moved to San Francisco, and then he could take care of Alice and what we put together there. And one of the reasons I should say that I picked this route, San Diego and Vegas versus the others, is because I was obsessed with alternative radio. And Extreme Radio had become X1075, and it needed a program director, and I wanted that station so bad. So I lived in San Diego. I had an apartment in Las Vegas, and I was the program director of Sophie at 1037 in San Diego, program director of Mix in Vegas, and then became the program director of X1075 in Las Vegas, with an eventual lead to VP of programming for Las Vegas. Because at a certain point, Sophie at 1037, it did well. It did really well, but there were some signal issues or what have you, and they decided to flip it to energy. They wanted to go top 40. And so it was just one station, and it was a new format, starting over again. And I chose to come back to Las Vegas, where I had been there. It felt like home. And the people were my people. The stations were my babies. And that's how I ended up in Vegas with the VP of Programming title.
Give me your best advice that you can give any programmer right now who has to manage multiple stations the way you had to oversee them.
Make sure you don't run out of storage on your phone so you can send emails. Make sure you change your password so you don't get hacked. I make lists every day to try to stay organized. The most important thing is to keep your teams motivated and to find great soldiers that can help you if you can't be in the market. Find your person. And that doesn't mean blowing somebody out or not giving them a chance if they're new to you. It means find out right away if you can trust that person. And if you can, great. If you can't, you've got to have a soldier to help you in each market. And not only do you have to communicate with that soldier as much as possible, you also have to show your face in front of the teams too, so they think and know that you care. And if you can't do that right now, particularly because of travel or what have you, shoot them an email or something. The most important thing, particularly with talent and people who are being managed, is communication. And I don't want to say empathy, but give them the perception that you care. Because if you don't, then your mind starts, oh my God, do they even care about me? What am I doing? Am I doing something wrong? Are they going to fire me? He hasn't said anything to me in 3 days. Like, I don't know what's going on. The worst thing you can do is not respond to an email or a question. So I think the most important thing is to find a good soldier and to communicate and lead your teams, even if it has to be through an email or just some kind of communication.
Did your time at CBS, did it come to an end because of the Entercom deal?
Yes. I was in Houston. We were in the red. I had barely been there a year and really didn't get a shot. And Entercom then made the announcement that they were going to absorb CBS, or the companies were going to merge, whatever. And I was on the radar because I had a big title and a very good paycheck. And it just blew up in my face.
But you've had to really sort of steer your way through consolidation like forever.
On more than one occasion, yeah. Most of the time I got lucky because I was doing so many things. But I think in this particular situation, the relationships, and I wasn't really given the opportunity to do what I was told I was being given the opportunity to do. So I'm not going to tell you that there weren't some very frustrating situations there. But I will tell you that I was a big title with a big paycheck, and they were so far in the red that the easiest thing to do was to cut one person versus having to cut a bunch of others. You know what I mean? And I get that. That's business. I do. I was sad because it's so close to my home, and I actually had my brothers and nieces and nephews who lived there. So it was hard, a hard pill to swallow, but it was also one of those situations where, you know, it's a double-edged sword. You loved being there, but it was a very hard job. And at the same time, when it all went down, I legit felt so much better after it did. You know what I mean? You walk out of there and you're like, you want to cry, and then you're like, oddly, I feel better. Because your gut, your instincts will sometimes tell you, this isn't working, but you're in denial because you're not a quitter, right? So it takes somebody to tell you you're fired. And to be quite honest, like a month later, I no longer had blood pressure issues or, I no longer needed therapy.
Well, it's almost like in 2016, you took a little break from radio, perhaps, because you upped your voiceover business.
And started consulting. And I, at the time, I didn't call it MC Media yet, but I was still doing it. And to me, that was a bit of a break and a little bit of a relief because I was following my rules and people were coming to me for advice and what have you. And I didn't have to have the plans that I wanted to do approved. I could just say, if I were you, here's what I would do. Or here's how I handled this in such and such situation.
So this is where the fun questions come in, because here you are, you get to take a step back from radio. You've got all the ideas in your top right-hand desk drawer that you didn't get to do because of, whatever reasons. What do you think radio's missing right now? If you were to wave your magic wand, what's one thing that is glaringly obvious that radio just needs to fix today?
To put everybody back in place that they eliminated. Radio is missing people and localism, creativity and conventionality. I write articles now about where I think the industry is, and it scares the hell out of me. These bigger companies who have done everything they can to slash budgets because they answer to shareholders have killed the product. So one of my last columns, actually, or my first column of the year it was about me driving from Las Vegas to San Diego. Overkill is what it was called. And what I meant by overkill was, so I drove to San Diego twice over Christmas and New Year's Eve. And I would hear something on the hot AC station in Las Vegas, and it was a legal ID. And then I would hear the same exact productive style legal ID on the CHR station. And then I would hear the same exact productive style legal ID on the news station. Okay, so they have one guy doing production. Then I would drive to San Diego, which brings you through the desert, through Victor Valley, through on the side of Los Angeles. You cross the 10 on the 15 and you blah, 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 into San Diego. First you go through Temecula, blah, blah, right? Okay. You don't know probably because you don't drive, but keep in mind, thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of Californians drive to Las Vegas every week and back, right? So we're talking about hundreds of thousands of people listening to radio in their car while they drive from somewhere in California to Las Vegas and back. So I hear the same style production. I hear the same jocks, right, in Las Vegas, all on the same stations. Drive through, I hear the same things in Los Angeles, same jocks, same countdown shows, same production, blah, blah, blah. Drive through Temecula, hear the same thing in San Diego. I mean, all of Victor Valley, all of these stations with this giant company have the exact same formula. And so if you're driving back and forth, and remember, a lot of Las Vegans are from California, so they're going in the opposite direction, listening to the same thing. You're hearing the same thing over and over again. On New Year's Eve weekend, when I drove to San Diego, I heard the same exact countdown with the same exact guy, the same exact content. And at first I thought it was cool because it was some good music, right? First time. Second time, okay, I get it. It's corporate radio. It's great. Third time, I was like, you've got to be kidding me. And I could do the break for the guy. I hadn't heard it. So what they basically had done was take this one countdown, which is probably 3 to 4 hours, and put it on these stations back to back to back to back to back at the same time in 2 different states, right? And that's a lot of territory because California is huge. So all the way from Nevada, all the way down to San Diego and what have you, and probably closer up, to San Francisco as well, because there are a lot of stations in that area. Same countdown over and over again. At one point, I was like, I can't take it anymore. And I just went to my music playlist or some stand-up comedy, which I love to listen to while I drive. They're killing radio because there's no uniqueness. There's no creativity. There are no local jocks. I don't want to hear the same countdown over and over again. And by that time, because it wasn't a current-based station or a current-based countdown, I had heard the Chili Peppers 15 times in one day or in one drive, which is approximately 6 hours with traffic to San Diego from Las Vegas. I love the Chili Peppers, man. I do. But at that point, I was like, I don't care if I never hear another Chili Peppers song ever again. So there's just no locality. They have killed it. The ratings suck. It's bad. I'm concerned because there are so many other media outlets out there that are so much more creative and ready to just move in and take over.
So innovation has come up. I think we always talk about being innovative in radio, but nobody is.
No one is. They're lazy. There's nobody to do it either. You've got the people at the top and they're these umbrella programmers and they just say, do this, do this, do this. And they have all the power because they're the few people making all the decisions, because they're the few people that have to arrange all the shows to get the corporate sponsors. And everything else is like, you remember back in the day when Cumulus had one guy programming everything, in charge of everything? It's bad. It's bad. It's bad radio. It was bad radio for them back then, and they know that now. And I don't know that they would ever go back to that, having been through that experience before. The thing about it is they're the same people in charge now that have been in charge for hundreds and hundreds of years. And they have no innovation because they don't know any better. Most of them have too many responsibilities, or they're very comfortable with the way things are now. And it's frustrating to me to see no innovation. And I fight this fight all the time about the lack of female program directors. And I was watching a show, New Amsterdam, on TV. I don't know if anybody knows or cares about it, but I love it. But anyway, he's a doctor. He moves to London. He's trying to get a job. He gets several interviews and he's interviewing with them. And the interviewer says, well, you sound very qualified. In fact, you sound overqualified. And he's like, well, no. I'm perfectly qualified. I can't tell you the number of times I have heard that in the last couple of years with myself in trying to pursue opportunities that I thought would be really great for me at this point in time. And then the guy looks him in the eye through Zoom and says, why would I hire someone who's equally as qualified as I am? And to me, that says everything, because this person is worried that one day I might take their job, that there's not enough jobs out there to hire good. Why do that when you're struggling so much? You're in the red, you're losing money, your ratings are down, revenue's down, and you have no innovation left in you. Why not have an A player on your team who is capable of managing multiple stations at one time and capable of organization and critical thinking versus having someone who all they know how to do is follow orders?
Well, that's too bad. You should always hire somebody smarter than you because you wind up getting the credit.
Right, exactly. Yes, those people make you look good. I have people like that. Justin Chase. I taught Justin how to do music. Justin Chase taught Brandon Bell how to do music. J-Love is one of my guys. I've hired some amazing people and I have no problem training the next me. That doesn't bother me. I'm not worried about that because I just know it makes me look good. We win. We have a good team together and I'm not afraid of it.
So radio does not have enough young people programming it, and radio does not have enough women programming it as well. Tell me about the Alliance for Women in Radio.
It's Alliance for Women in Media. There's Women in Radio, Mentor and Inspiring Women, Alliance for Women in Media. But most of them cover all forms of media because we do face a lot of the same problems when it comes to gender. But they are a fantastic organization that raises a lot of money for scholarships. They obviously host the Gracie Awards, which I'm sure you've heard of, which are international and national awards recognizing women for the amazing work they do in the media. And they do great events. Like I was a very big part of the Southern California chapter when I lived in Las Vegas, and I won a local award for management there. And one of the things that we did that I loved was speed mentoring. So the younger women would come to these classes or whatever you want to call sessions or what have you. This was back when you could meet in person and you didn't need to be 6 feet apart. And we do speed mentoring. So you'd have your mentors, obviously, men and women on one side. And then you'd have the young women come across and tell you a little bit about themselves and then ask the questions that they could. So you get so many different perspectives. Those kinds of things to me would have been amazing for me when I was trying to grow up as a young female programmer and I had nobody to talk to or to ask questions, find solutions, or to just guide me or talk me off the ledge,
Yeah, I miss getting together with conferences and speed mentoring. Are you in Las Vegas now?
Yes, I am.
Just before we got on, you mentioned that your email crashed. Lo and behold, your latest column in All Access talks about email and how crushing it is. And, you've given some great advice about returning emails right away, but how do you manage all that? Because I know that a lot of people who are working in radio, especially in management, they get like 500-600 emails a day. It's crushing.
Yeah, it's hard. That's why, and I don't recommend this for all people because at a point in my life, it was really bad. But people who do get that number of emails, I just go through them all the time. But that's just me. A little bit better advice is probably to set aside X amount of time in the morning just to make sure that you're responding and going through all of your emails. Because again, if somebody sends you an email and there's no response, it's basically an FU. Like, I don't have time for you, blah, blah, blah. And that's not good communication at all. It's really not, especially if those are your team members or the people that you want to kill for you. I do believe there are some very passive aggressive people out there who like to use email as a bomb. It's just as bad as walking into a meeting and and throwing a grenade into the middle of a meeting and then walking out. Shooting off an email is not a way to get things off your chest unless you're responding specifically and professionally, because there's nothing worse than having, and I used an example in the column about the first time I ever could afford to go on a decent vacation, not to mention get one, because I was finally in a position where I had people who I could delegate to. And I'm in Hawaii for the first time ever, and it's beautiful, amazing. I'm on the beach, blah, blah, blah. And I open up my email like a dumbass and I read it. And it's my new boss putting me on blast with like 10 suits on the email in the middle of my vacation. And from that point on, I feel so bad for my friend. I almost wanted to give her money back for her trip because I had ruined the whole thing. I was devastated. I was angry. I was frustrated the whole time. I couldn't decide, am I going to respond now or am I going to wait till I get back and try to teach him a lesson, which of course would never have happened because he didn't care. We think because of email, it's a good way to not have to actually face conflict or face someone and look them in the eye and say, we need to fix this problem. We think it's just an easy way of getting stuff off our chest, but it's not. It's just as abusive as verbal abuse. And then it's on paper. So then if the person is paranoid, the way sometimes talent can be, or sometimes people can be, they will read it over and over again and make themselves crazy and try to figure out what the best responses are, and just over and over and over again. So I find that I check my email all the time. It's not for everybody. I think another good way to do it is to set aside some time to check your emails, right? To make sure that you're at least responding, even if it's okay, got it. And then to really be conscious of professionalism when you send an email, because it's on record for the rest of your life. And not only that, but you can really do some serious damage. And most of the time, you're mouthing off to someone whose help you really need, whether you know it or like it or not, right? To solve a problem. So why cause more issues when you just really need a solution?
You're in Las Vegas, which is the home of Amber De La Garza, who is the productivity specialist. And I've had her on this podcast to talk email before, and I've often thought radio should reach out to her to sort of navigate the email world and to get more productivity out of radio. That was a crazy idea I threw out there, but I thought it was a good one.
Absolutely. Well, you saw in there, I did find this article on the 51 rules of email etiquette or something,
All the links, by the way, to that are going to be in the show notes of this episode, as well as all the articles that you referenced along the way. Thank you so much for taking the time to be on the podcast. I appreciate it so much.
No, thank you. I appreciate it. I'm flattered. Thank you.
The Sound Off podcast is written and hosted by Matt Kundle. Produced by Evan Serminski. Social media by Courtney Krebsbach. Another great creation from the Sound Off Media Company. Imaging courtesy Core Image Studios. There's always more at soundoffpodcast.com.